It has been said that the real measure of a nation is not counted in its victories or triumphs, but rather in how it responds to those of its people who risk it all. Those few men and women who sacrifice themselves to answer the call when their country is in need, who put their very life on the line for their fellow countrymen and the ideals and principles we stand for as a nation. And so it has been with America. From the earliest days of our founding fathers, one of our most enduring values is that in times of trial and tribulation, during our darkest hours, we reach out to those Americans whose sacrifices and service make us great. Nowhere is this more evident than in the respect and honor we show for the brave men and women of our armed forces, who make the ultimate sacrifice to preserve our freedom. Throughout our history, we have honored and memorialized those who have fought and died to protect our way of life, like no other nation in the world. This is who we are. But of all that we bestow upon those who fight for our country, and especially those who have fallen in our great battles, there is no greater tribute, no greater honor that we could bestow upon them than committing ourselves wholeheartedly, as individuals and as a nation, to the families they leave behind. Families whose commitment and sacrifice last a lifetime as they quietly live on, suffering separation, pain, and anguish long after the flags are put away. To those who have fallen, to those who have served, and to those who are serving now, reaching out in love and compassion to their families is the greatest honor we could bestow, the greatest tribute we could ever pay. For often, the families are truly the forgotten patriots. This is the personal story of ordinary American families, men, women, and children, who bravely stand alone and face that moment when they must wave goodbye to a new husband or a wife, a son or a daughter, a young father or mother, as they leave home for an uncertain future and join America's frontline warriors half a world away. For many, that moment begins a journey they never really expected and a life they never really planned for. For a wife with young children, the prospects of facing unknown months or even years without her husband can be daunting, lonely, and often desperate as she assumes the roles of both mother and father for her children. She faces night after lonely night in fear and uncertainty, all the while reassuring her children that all will be okay, and every day struggling to make ends meet on limited resources. So too, countless parents face unceasing fear as their sons and daughters, their hopes and dreams for the future, and the product of years of loving upbringing, prepare to engage firsthand in America's fight against tyranny and oppression around the world. And it is no doubt hardest for the children, the youngest group of Americans who serve without fully understanding the reasons for the separation or the reasons for the sacrifice. Every day, in every city, town, and village across the country, young men and women voluntarily leave the comfort of their homes and families and commit their lives and future to America's armed forces. They willingly engage the enemies of our nation to defend the cause of freedom whenever and wherever the threat arises. And when they do, their families assume the same commitment, not serving on the front line, but serving in silent vigil, heroically piecing their lives together day after day while facing a long, lonely, and uncertain future. This, then, is their story. At times, it's a story of disappointment, loneliness, and even despair. But so too, it is a story of the power of the human spirit, of grit and guts, of overcoming the odds, of perseverance and devotion to duty, loyalty and commitment, and indeed, hope for the future. Above all, this is a tribute to America's unsung patriots, the wives and husbands, the sons and daughters, the mothers and fathers, who sacrifice in silent vigil, and indeed serve every hour of every day alongside America's frontline warriors. Since 1775, an estimated 43 million men and women have served in far-off ports of call, with exotic names like Dakar, Tripoli, Normandy, and Iwo Jima. Some have been called to fight epic battles on foreign shores. Others have been tasked with the burden of protecting Americans here at home. Still others have worked in laboratories and offices, leading scientific advancements that were unprecedented in history. Some fight for the sanctity and principles of America herself, while others have been called upon to make great personal sacrifices to help bring freedom to every dark corner of the globe.
In every generation of Americans, there have been challenges and threats, and in each generation of Americans, the people have stepped forward and volunteered to see that our country is, in fact, defended against those threats. And we owe so much to the men and women in uniform who volunteer to serve our country and put their lives at risk on behalf of everyone else in our society. God bless them all.
No matter where they serve or what they do, there is one common element of sacrifice that too often goes unnoticed. Every one of them has left someone behind. When one member joins, the whole family serves. To military families, if they've heard that once, they've heard it 1,000 times. And they know exactly what it means. Arguably, no other profession or occupation has a more profound and lasting impact on every member of the family and on every aspect of family life. General Richard B. Myers served as our nation's 15th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in a critical time of war and challenge immediately after the attacks of September 11th. It was the culmination of more than 40 years of service for both he and his wife, Mary Jo.
Military members and their families, I think, see service to their country as a privilege and are proud of the service of the military member of that family, whether it's the young children or one of the spouses or whomever. This notion of pride and a willingness to put up with a lot of inconvenience to serve. And so a lot of things they take in stride. And I don't think they demand much for the special sacrifices, the special courage they have to show day in and day out when their loved one is deployed. They don't want much, but I think some appreciation for the fact that they're living a life quite a bit different than the average American.
And I think when we think in terms of the sacrifice, the fact that these are volunteers, there's no draft in the military today. The people that are there, whether they're Guard, Reserve, or active duty, are there as volunteers. They were not forced to go. They went willfully, they served willfully and proudly. And I think that as Americans, we're touched by that. We're moved by that. And in many cases, we don't quite understand it. What motivates them to go and take those risks? And that comes back to a big word that's patriotism.
To be sure, it is a career and a calling that comes with many rewards for the individual and the family. Whether in the Army, Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, or the Coast Guard, whether in the Reserves or National Guard, they are part of a very close-knit and highly respected fraternity. The real 1%, the 1% of Americans that are called to protect and defend the remaining 99% of Americans. The 1% who stand ready to risk it all in defense of our nation and all that we hold dear. The 1% who are today deployed both here at home and in 138 countries around the world, standing guard to protect our freedom and fighting to secure freedom for others in what has become the longest war in American history. This is a fraternity with bonds that last a lifetime for both the service member and the families. And of course, the modern high-tech military of the 21st century is replete with rewarding diverse occupational specialties, lifetime learning and growth opportunities, and vibrant, stimulating careers. Mary Scott, chairman of the Board of Governors for the National Military Family Association, knows firsthand both the trials and blessings that come as part of a military family. Her father, General Richard J. Tallman, was a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and was killed in combat in Vietnam in 1972. Her husband, General Bruce Scott, served for more than 30 years in the Army, and all 6 of her children served on active duty, 5 in the Army and 1 in the Air Force.
Since I've been a part of the military family my entire life, as a military child, Army brat, wife, and now mother, I have a pretty good overview of what goes on for a military family. There are many things that are wonderful about being in a military family. My memories of childhood, despite the fact that my father was ultimately killed in Vietnam and was away from home a lot, are wonderful memories. We were always very proud to be part of the military. We always felt the distinction that our dad was doing something special, that as we moved around all the time, it was for a good reason, and we were always very proud of that. It's something that is in your blood. It's just part of your life. I never held back. I never second-guessed whether or not I should do this as a married person. Just went for it, and my husband and I had a wonderful time raising our 6 kids in the military.
We really enjoy the lifestyle. I know all my brothers and sisters have 5 siblings. I'm the oldest. We all really enjoyed being Army kids. It was a great life, moving around every 2 years and living all over Europe. It was really a great experience. I think I also got to see that my dad really, really loved being in the Army. And we all knew that. You could tell every day. I think it's probably hard to understand how exactly really a military family works. Or people usually say, oh, I couldn't ever do that. I could never move like that. I could never put my kids in a different school. But maybe it's a little bit hard to understand that we don't think we're being tortured.
On average, military families move every 2.9 years. Each move means new schools, new doctors, setting up new accounts, finding new grocery stores, and making new friends. Many military families find these moves exciting, an opportunity for a new adventure and a chance to make new and different friends. For many in the military, a life of moving around, seeing new places, and making new friends provides an unmatched level of adventure and excitement. But for most, the greatest reward is simply knowing that you're working for something bigger than yourself. That as an individual and as a family, you're devoting yourselves to a higher cause.
We didn't know what we were getting into when we joined the military, and there were hardships ahead of us that we did not anticipate. But your friends and your family help you through those. And yeah, there'll be dark moments. There'll also be some of the brightest moments that life can offer, and that's life.
We started this course together. He started Air Force training right before, 1 week before we were married. So we really, it was our life together, our whole married life. And I loved the adventure of a new place, and our children adjusted to it. One time when we stayed someplace nearly 3 years, they said, okay, what are you not telling us? Where we must be moving, we must be moving. And those moves did come a little more frequent during the high school years. And that, I won't deny, that does bring its challenges. But I think each of our children now would acknowledge the strength, the resilience that gave them. And it was always that military family feel that you had. Each new assignment, you always seemed to at least know someone or have a contact that opened the door and made it feel like home again very quickly.
Well, for one who never thought he'd make the military career and was anticipating getting out after my 5-year obligation and then going to 40 years, obviously there's some things that I appreciate about military service, and I've talked about a few of those. The absolute requirement for integrity in those that you serve with, the no discrimination, the sense of serving something bigger than yourself, and just the privilege of being able to serve your country and the people you're with. And so over time, as your circle of friends in the military go, and you make friends, and they're friends for life. And at the end of a 40-year career, you've got a pretty rich Rolodex of people that if they called me and wanted my wallet, I'd give them my wallet in a heartbeat. It's that kind of trust that you have with people. And after all, life's about people and relationships, and I don't think you find a better place to build those relationships.
I appreciate the fact that so many people now do recognize the sacrifices that the whole family makes, and that thank the families for their service. And I prefer the term service rather than sacrifice, because I think most of these young people feel that it's a most willing thing that they do, and that opportunity to serve does bring its sacrifices with it as well. But it was a wonderful life to make a commitment to something greater than yourself. And I think your family develops a closeness and a strength, and you will serve with no greater people. It was an honor.
I don't know, heroes, I don't know what that word hero is. I see the kids at Balboa Hospital. Their parent or their wives being there every single day dealing with their young kid, husband they just married to, and he's not the same when he got back home. They're the ones that are the heroes, the ones that you never mentioned.
If you put yourself in their places, and the spouse, in the last 10 years, the spouse who's waved goodbye to her husband for the 3rd time or the 4th time as they go off to Iraq or Afghanistan for a year's tour, and reading the headlines every day about another improvised explosive device blowing up some coalition troops somewhere, or whatever it is, and living with that, am I going to be next? Is somebody going to be knocking at my door in the middle of the night to tell me that my loved one, the one that I'm trying to build my life with, is no longer around? And I think that has a huge impact on our families. And I have a lot of admiration for the way that our families have handled that situation. Again, I think they view it, maybe not explicitly, but I think in their subconscious they view this as a privilege and an important responsibility.
And I would say, America, you should be very proud of these families and that serve our country and serve something greater than themselves. They are bound by a code of honor, respect, trust, accountability to each other and to our country. And it was our great honor and privilege to serve among them and to represent them.
While the rewards of military service are unique, so too are the risks, the challenges, the sacrifices. And often they're challenges and sacrifices that last a lifetime. Even aside from a family member deployed to a war zone half a world away, stress and strain on the home front is an everyday occurrence. Whether it is being married to a service member with military demands that transcend a normal workday schedule, experiencing frequent military moves to new locations, raising children in multiple homes and schools throughout their growing up years, or coping with serious illness or the death of a family member, life in the military can create an endless list of high-stress issues. While we all experience some of these in our everyday lives, many are often exaggerated in the context of the intrinsic demands of the military. To be sure, however, the separations are the source of some of the greatest challenges for military families, especially those resulting from lengthy deployments and multiple tours of duty in war zones. This has, of course, always been true. But the Iraq War and the decade-long war in Afghanistan have brought unique challenges to tens of thousands of American families. Since 2001, more than 2 million troops have been deployed to support the efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan. The pace of these deployments has been intense and frequent amidst the various campaigns and periodic surges, and many service members have been called upon to deploy several times, often with very little time at home between the deployments. Unlike other recent conflicts, these wars have relied heavily on the use of National Guard and Reserve forces, members of the military who often have significantly fewer support structures at home than active duty service members. The nature of the conflicts themselves have also added new stresses to families and service members alike. We are fighting an enemy who has all too often been unrecognizable, and through the use of improvised explosive devices and various other insurgent forces, according to the RAND Corporation, in these wars, there has been no real defined front line. This has led to a new level of uncertainty for our troops in the field, which has spilled over to their families at home. But while there are new challenges in the recent wars, many elements of deployment and its impact on families remains the same. And as it has been from the very beginning, the biggest challenge is simply the separation.
We have Navy folks out on ships. We have Marines out on ships. We have people. My husband was assigned to Korea for a year, where my kids and I were back in Kentucky. So there are those separations that come from the military life. Separation from families, from your extended family at home. Military is one of the few employers who will take an 18-year-old right out of high school that they've hired, and that employer is moving them across the country or across the world. Most companies don't move people like that until they get into middle management. So military moves young employees, young families far from home.
Major Jay Gowell and his wife, Major Kate Gowell, understand the challenges of deployment firsthand. Married shortly after they both graduated from West Point, their life together has been defined by successive periods of deployment.
We knew that we would be part for our officer basic training. Kate was a quartermaster officer and I was going to be an armor officer. So we knew that we were going to have to complete training apart. Kate would be at Fort Lee and I was at Fort Knox. So we knew that going into it, I think. And we didn't obviously anticipate deployments. We knew it's a theoretical possibility, but we didn't really anticipate and really think through it, as we're just starting out.
Generally, a standard deployment is a year. We've had 15 months and then some shorter, certainly. But when we both deployed for a year, just about a year. And Jay deployed first when our second son was 5 months old. And then he came back when he was about 16 months old. And then I deployed about 2.5 months later for a year. And then I came back. And so our son was 2.5.
When I was deployed, our one son had surgery, for example, or my mom was sick at some point. She had to have a procedure done. So when those things would come about, even having my mom there wouldn't be enough, and Kate's mom would come out to help out, or Kate's sister who lived in Texas at the time would come up to help out. And it was really essential just to keep stability. I mean, you try to it's almost like building a wall around the kids to protect them from the negative aspects of the deployment.
Well, I mean, it's a long time to be apart for basically 2 years. that's certainly a stressor on a marriage or a relationship to be separated for so long, because you go through so many different things. And it's particularly raising children, because it's something that, for us, we got married, and after a while we had children, and it was a joint endeavor, and then all of a sudden you sort of find yourself as a single parent.
The challenges and fear that come with deployment is not confined simply to spouses and children. For a parent who's invested everything in raising their son or daughter, sending them off to war can be a moment of intense pride and equally intense concern. Jeff and Lynn Granger know this experience firsthand, as their son David served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq.
I knew it was going to happen, but when he called, and I'm not exactly sure when it was, and they had to fill out their wills, and he was 18, and he called to tell me that he'd done that, and if he died, this is where he wanted his money to go, to his siblings, and where he wanted to be buried, and I just wrote it all down. He was telling me over the phone, and then it's really real.
It was hard letting him go. They allowed him to spend the night with us in the hotel, and he had to bring everything to the hotel, everything but his rifle, his rucksack and everything. He had all this gear. Gave him hugs, and he didn't want to let go of him. He just wanted to have that physical contact, but you didn't want to embarrass your child either in front of all these, macho soldiers. His sergeant came by and, I say, hey, he's a great soldier. He's a smart soldier. Don't worry about him. He's going to be all right. I'll watch out for him.
The pit of my stomach, I was upset to my stomach, because I knew he could die.
And just thinking about, now what we got 15, 18 months of this to worry about, it was the beginning of, a year and a half of just anxiety, I guess, worrying about your son.
Since 9/11, the length and frequency of deployments in support of Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom have been unprecedented, and the mental, physical, and emotional toll on families, and especially children, has been and continues to be disturbing and not easily resolved.
They worry about that parent who is deployed. And one of the problems sometimes is that the civilian kids in their school or their soccer team or their church youth group don't always understand what it's like to have that parent gone. This isn't just your regular business trip. A deployment to Afghanistan is dangerous and scary. It's something when something really bad happens, it's on the nightly news. And you don't want something about your parent touching your parent on the nightly news.
Despite the fact that the Department of Defense and the services have responded with an overwhelming number of programs and resources to help families through the longest continuing period of war in American history, a recent research study commissioned by the National Military Family Association highlighted the impact of extended and multiple deployments. As the months of parental deployment increased, so did the child's challenges, with older children experiencing even more difficulties. There was a direct correlation between the mental health of the caregiver and the well-being of the child.
What we've had ran look at military kids ages 7 and up, and they're at home, their caregiver, normally their mom, and what this study found among these 1,500 kids was that it gets hard. Dealing with deployment gets harder for the older kids. These kids are taking on a lot more responsibility at home. There's a lot more pressure on them as they take on that caregiver role. They worry not just about that service member, they worry about mom, they worry about the younger siblings. Kids did worse when their caregiver wasn't doing well. When mom was having a bad time dealing with the deployment, it affected kids. So that told us we need to keep supporting those military spouses, because one of the best ways to support kids was to support their parent at home. The research also showed that Guard and Reserve spouses, especially those caregivers, had more problems because they were more isolated. The other piece that's been problematic in this war is that because people knew they were going again, some folks in the family would decide not to bother to reconnect. Oh, you're just going to leave. Why should I bother? Just so, this was especially true for some of those older kids in our research study, that reconnecting with that service member. But we hear it from spouses, we hear it from the service members, that they'll stay with their unit guy, the buddies, that's their new family, that unit that they went to war with. And they know they're going to go to war again, so they don't bother reconnecting with their family. What's going to happen now as the wars draw down? We've had the drawdown in Iraq, we're going to have a drawdown eventually in Afghanistan, we hope, is now you're going to have people who are going to have to reconnect with their families. And so we're going to need help from communities, we're going to need help from the military, in folks to reach out and help those families reconnect and come together again.
Hello, I am Air Force Staff Sergeant Dejay Herrera of the 455th Expeditionary Medical Group here in Bagram, Afghanistan. I'd like to send a big hello to my baby girl, Alina, in Las Vegas, who's hanging out with her daddy right now, hopefully being good. Mommy misses you, and I'll see you soon.
I'd like to say hi to my parents, Katrina Riggs and David Riggs, and my little sister, Kaylee Riggs, back at home in Aurora, Indiana. I love you very much.
Say hi to my husband David, kids Quentin, Christian, Elise, and Eli Beelum. I love you and miss you, and I'll be home soon.
Hi Jen, it's Dad. I'd like to congratulate you and the Ichabod Crane senior class of 2012 upon your graduation from high school. Unfortunately, as you can clearly see, honey, I couldn't be there for you on this special day, but freedom doesn't come free and not without a price. This short video really doesn't contain my pride for you. Even though I'm thousands of miles away and the threat of danger and terrorism is constant, I'll be home next year to see an older, educated daughter that I had to leave behind. Honey, I love you very much, and I'll see you soon. Congratulations again to the entire class of 2012. God bless you, Jenny, and all of you in attendance, and thank you for everyone for your support to the troops.
It's homecoming day for the USS Nimitz, and everyone in town can sense the excitement. Service members who have been at sea for months finally get to see their families. It's the moment they've all been dreaming about. Perhaps the most exciting part of the day belongs to those families who gave birth to a child while their sailor was at sea. A special area is cordoned off when returning sailors meet, for the very first time, their new son or daughter. It's an emotional moment for everyone.
I can't describe how I feel right now. I'm just full of joy. I'm gonna go home and spend as much time with them as I possibly can. Not let them leave my sight.
My son's coming back. It's all that matters.
Something built up so much. And after 7 months of being gone and being able to touch him again.
Seeing him again was like seeing them for the first time.
I promised him I wouldn't, but probably gonna cry, yeah.
But to the surprise of many, these servicemen and women may be about to embark on their most challenging battle to date, a period of time the military calls reintegration.
Coming home has turned out to be a lot harder than people think. people see the signs and the yellow ribbons and the welcome home celebrations and think, oh, this is wonderful. But then you get into all those family life details, and those family life details have this war experience as the cloud over them. You have to deal with both the normal routine of family life plus the change, the absence from that war. Everybody changes over a 1-year period. You know, kids grow up, kids mature, spouses do different things, service member, everybody changes no matter what you do. But when you've had that change in a war environment, and it's more to reconcile for both the service member and the family. And so it makes that reconnection so hard. How do you start the conversation? How do you allocate these jobs? I mean, how do you deal with the changes that happen to a teenager? You know, my daughter was in 8th grade when my husband left. She'd finished 9th grade by the time he got back. And so she's wanting to learn how to drive, she's wanting to go to the mall with her friends, and my husband's saying, who is this person? You know, she's not my little girl anymore. So families have to deal with that change. The family didn't stop growing while that service member was gone. The service member sees a lot in war that affects them. How do you reconcile those two things? That's the struggle for a lot of these families.
The Department of Defense has studied the issue of reintegration and sees it as one of the key issues we will be facing in the years to come, as our nation draws down its forces engaged in various parts of the world.
I think both pre-deployment, in the middle deployment, and post-deployment, you go through a range of emotions. There's sadness and happiness and joy and stress all mixed into every single phase. I think the homecomings were phenomenal. It was a second, third, fourth, fifth honeymoon. But you also had a lot of stress getting to know each other again, because you went through a lot of changes during that deployment. When Tim came back from his first deployment, I was much more independent than I had been when he left. So I was doing things around the house without even asking him, and all of a sudden he was trying to fill this role that he wanted to in the household, and so it took a while to adjust to those roles.
The reunion phase, which typically lasts a few days, is most often filled with joy, relief, and relaxation as the family makes the first small steps to reconnect. But shortly thereafter, most returning families experience a surprising phase of disruption.
I was one of the few people that actually wasn't married and didn't have children. And I see what it did to their families, and families just get torn apart by that. You know, you got guys that are going on their 5th deployment, 6th deployment now. 6+ years away from home, you don't even get to be there for your children growing up. Your wife's got to try to handle everything, you know. This isn't necessarily true for all of them, but a lot of times it doesn't work out because all the stress, you know, always being gone. It's a bad spot for the whole family. The children too, they suffer a lot from it. There's definitely going to be problems, especially whenever the few times you do get to come home, there's a huge disconnect between, you know, yourself and your family members. Sometimes it's hard to even communicate with them. And, you know, you can tell that they want to, but they don't really know what to say. They don't know how to say things. Because, you know, it's just some things there really aren't words for, but you can tell they want to talk. But it just doesn't come out all the time.
He came back injured, but it's nothing you can see. I mean, his best friend lost a leg, and that was horrible. And people can know that. And David's is having a problem with post-traumatic stress, as is his other friend. Where they were this last time in Afghanistan was really, really, really bad. It's hard because my child went through all that and saw all that and did all that and smelled it and heard it, and that's something you really don't want for your child to have to go through.
And I know he's always going to have these nightmares, and he's only in his mid-20s, so I mean he's got a long time to go through all this stuff and relive this stuff, and it just pulls at my heart.
It was almost nonstop. There's always somebody getting hurt, somebody getting killed, always getting attacked, and you knew when you were going to get attacked there is because you can pretty much guarantee you got about a 50% chance every time you leave that somebody's going to try to shoot at you or hit you with a roadside bomb or throw a grenade or something like that. Because we were right on the Pakistan border, so there's always something happening there. They call us up saying they had a catastrophic IED strike, which means everybody's dead. Yeah, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. They were in a Humvee, and it was just in pieces. And you can't describe that. You can't put it into words. Yeah, it's definitely different coming home after that, that's for sure.
In his second inaugural address, Abraham Lincoln eloquently stated our nation's promise to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan.
We haven't experienced 10 years of war ever, and it's sustaining that for the service member and their families, sustaining that readiness, sustaining that resilience. And some of our children have only known a parent at war. Sometimes we get so caught up in the service members returning that we neglect to prepare our young children. And actually this happened with two of our staff members. One, they're heading out the door to pick up Dad from the airport, and she wondered why her son was hanging back. And her son and his father had had a terrific, wonderful relationship before, and he was just gone. He had been gone for 6 months, and all of a sudden her son said to her, "What if Dad doesn't like me anymore?" And so she just felt, well, we hadn't really prepared that reintegration, that coming back together. So we constantly let people know that there is a need for the support for the families, for the service members, to have the resources to help them deal with these problems and have them come back to what could be a new normal for them, but as normal as their family can be.
As our nation moves from wartime to a period of relative peace, this reintegration process will take place in thousands of homes across the country. But for those who come back injured, the challenges can often last a lifetime. Shannon Maxwell knows this trial firsthand. On October 7, 2004, her husband Tim Maxwell was in his forward operating base in northern Iraq. At approximately 1 p.m., an enemy mortar round landed in his camp. It was a single moment that would forever change the Maxwell family.
Prior to the deployment, our kids were 10 and 7 at the time, the two kids. We had talked about the fact that Dad was going away. It was very dangerous. It was a wartime. We talked about what would happen if Dad died and what we would do, where we would go. Those were conversations that we as a couple felt very strongly that we needed to know. He needed to know that I would be safe and taken care of if things happened. But we felt strongly that the kids would need to know also. They were asking all sorts of questions, and we were very honest with our children. But we never even broached the subject of him being wounded. That was something that never came to mind.
After receiving the news of her husband's injury, Shannon began the task that no military spouse ever wants to do: share the news with her children. Shortly afterwards, Shannon Maxwell packed up and headed to Germany to be with her husband during his early treatment.
When I first told the children that he had been injured, we always try to stay upbeat. So I told them I have good news, and I have a little bit of bad news. So I told them that Dad has been hurt. The bad guys hurt him, but he's going to get to come home early, so we're going to get to be with him. Their imagination ran wild. They imagined the worst thing, and if we had discussed it as a family and I had given them a little more information, they would have handled things a little better. But they were faced with not only the fact that their father was injured, but I had to go leave them at home. My sister and brother-in-law moved into my house and stayed with them, so that was wonderful. But I remember my son telling me, Mom, what happens if something happens to you too? So they were already faced with the reality that something happened to their dad, but now it was real to them. So something could happen to Mom too. In a way, they lost both parents for a little while.
Several weeks later, Tim was brought back to the United States to rejoin his family and continue his medical treatment. Shannon Maxwell, like so many military spouses, recognized that there was something she could do with her experience to help others facing similar circumstances. Instead of simply mourning over the losses in their lives together, Shannon gathered her thoughts and emotions and put them into words by authoring a children's book, Our Daddy is Invincible.
When I was sitting in the ICU after my husband had been wounded, thinking about my children back at home and just the fear in their eyes, the uncertainties that I had faced and was sure that they were facing, I started writing. I just wanted them to know that everything was going to be okay. I think, it's a fairy tale myth that kids hold on to, that mommy and daddy are superheroes, that they're invincible. Nothing can really harm them. And the point of the book was that our daddy is invincible. So physical injuries may diminish some capabilities, but there's an invincibility of spirit that goes well beyond that, no matter how extensive the injury.
Shannon Maxwell's story is increasingly common, given the nature of today's wars and the enormous advancements in medical treatment for our wounded soldiers. As the current conflicts in which our nation is engaged begin to wind down, it is again becoming a national priority to care for those who have borne the battle in far-off lands across the world. Wounded service members have wounded families, and the injuries suffered by our service members and the impact on their families will continue to be an issue of national significance in the generations to come.
There are more and more severe levels of amputees, traumatic brain injuries of all levels, mild, moderate, and severe, that people are living through and trying to acclimate into society. I think we're at a disadvantage because a lot of the general populace doesn't understand these injuries. They don't understand how productive these people can still be, but they also don't understand the nuances that they may need to be productive.
Because of the protective gear that our service members wear in the theater of operations, we have more service members surviving wounds that they would have died from in Vietnam or earlier. So they come back and they have to learn to live with an amputation. They have to learn to live with a traumatic brain injury, with PTSD. And for the visible wounds, of course, there's treatment and people can identify that service member is wounded. But for the invisible wounds like TBI or PTS, that is harder for people to identify. And so they may be unfamiliar with their behavior changes and how to support them. And so this is where education of families and the community in general is so important.
No matter what the year, no matter what the war, there have always been a certain group who have been called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice. For them and their families, the loss is immeasurable, and very little can be done to help heal the wounds. At Arlington National Cemetery, just outside our nation's capital, it is a scene that is played over every day as families come from around the world to mourn the loss they never anticipated. Arlington, in all its beauty and reverence, is, to be sure, a celebration of what made America great from the very beginning. But first and foremost, it is the final resting place for men and women who gave the last full measure of devotion to their country. Such was the case with a young woman named Sam Huff. When Sam Huff was 16 and a junior at Mountain View High School in Tucson, Arizona, she shocked her parents. Sam was a popular girl, full of life and curiosity, determined to make a difference in the world, and known as much for her caring heart as her social grace and striking beauty. Sam loved music and dancing. She loved Disney ballads and leading the Mountain View marching band. So it was a shock to her parents when Sam, at age 16, told them she wanted to go in the Army. She had a plan, she said. She'd serve her country first and then go to college to study psychology and then go to work for the FBI. Sam could have done almost anything in life, for her life represented a combination of tough, determined inner strength and a soft, compassionate heart. So Sam stuck to her plan, and after the rigors of basic training, Private First Class Sam Huff was deployed to Iraq as part of the 170th Military Police Company. When her sergeant first saw his new recruit, he shook his head and said, 5 feet nothing, 100 pounds of nothing. But the sergeant soon discovered, as he would later say, beneath that beautiful young lady was a backbone of steel. So committed was Sam Huff that despite the risks she knew all too well, she often remarked to her fellow soldiers that she wouldn't change where she was for anything in the world. On April 17, 2005, while returning from guarding an Iraqi police station, the vehicle she was riding in was hit by a roadside bomb. Sam was critically injured. She quietly asked the sergeant next to her to pass along a message to her parents. He said, "No, you'll be able to make the call yourself." Sam responded, "No, I don't think I can make it. Tell my mom I love her, and tell my dad good luck with his album." Today, the 18-year-old girl, with an inner strength and spirit well beyond her years, is resting at Arlington.
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I take this obligation freely, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office upon which I am about to enter. So help me God.
The oath of office. In one form or another, it has been a constant of the United States military since June of 1775, when the first oath was created as part of the act to establish the Continental Army. For nearly 250 years, millions of Americans have taken a similar oath, pledging to defend the United States at almost any cost. And since then, more than 2.5 million have paid the ultimate price of death or injury to fulfill this oath.
You know, you realize that when you raise your right hand and swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. You know that there's, with that, this implicit unlimited liability. When you raise your hand and you say, "I do," or "I swear." I think it's different for a spouse that's back home. While you're off doing that, they did not raise their right hand, and they didn't swear allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. And so they worry in a much different way, and probably in a more continuous way, about the safety of their loved one.
It's a lot easier to recognize the service of that person in uniform, or that veteran who's wearing the veteran's ball cap, you know, this insignia of this ship, or Vietnam veterans, that visible sign that they either serve or did serve. Families are invisible. Military families are living in the community. Their kids go to your kids' schools, they play on your kids' Little League teams. A military spouse or a military mom may work in the cubicle next to you, but they don't wear a uniform. They don't have a sign that says, I am a military family member. So it's harder for people to thank them for their service. And so that's the challenge for us as a country, is finding ways to reach out to those families, find them and say thank you.
More than 10 years of war. Our nation has never been at war for that long a period, and it is difficult to judge the long-term implications this will have on our country. Despite the long and painful separations, despite the family struggles and sacrifices, despite the fear and the prospects of an uncertain future, the examples of families left behind, heroically serving their neighbors, their communities, and their nation are simply remarkable. And today, after more than 10 years of war, and with various potential conflicts looming on the horizon, it has become a national priority of singular importance that we as a nation address the concerns and challenges of our military families. And indeed, there is no question that the families of those wounded or lost in battle require not only our undying gratitude, but also our continuing support in the months and years to come. 1% of the population of our country is all there is to protect our nation against ever-mounting international threats. So it stands to reason that among the top priorities of our nation should be to honor and care for the families of those 1%. For just as our frontline warriors serve, so too their families serve. They serve in silent vigil.